Forum, just so everyone knows, it's a subgroup of Marin Builders Association where members in the remodeling realm come together to learn about each other, where members can connect, build connections, share resources, and collaborate at meaningful events like this one. So the format is going to be an open discussion. We're going to have the panel presentations. Please feel free to add any questions that you like into the chat. Then there will be an open question and answer period at the end. If you'd like to chat to each other as well, feel free to do that. Okay, Brad, take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine. I'm Brad Hubble. I'm on the board here, and I am co-chair of the Builders Forum with Ben Goldberg. Ben's down there waving. Hello, Ben. And today we have three fantastic panel members as we talk about economy and the landscape of supply in the building industry. One of them is an economist. That's Rob Eidler, and hi, Rob. And he is a professor of economics at Sonoma State University, where he's been teaching since 1995. Earned a PhD from University of California, Davis in 98, and he earned a BA of economics at CSU in Chicago in 92. He's married, with one daughter, pardon me, and is a native of Sonoma County. And they are sheep and cattle ranchers in Marin, Sonoma since 1910. That's a fantastic past. Rob Walker, wave Rob Walker, hello, there he is a founder of Upcycled Builders. So he's representing the builder side of this discussion, fourth generation San Francisco building family. He's worked several years as a carpenter in the high-end sector of San Francisco before founding Upcycled Builders and following a career in finance after college. Upcycled Builder focuses on residential renovation and new build projects in the 2 to 10 million range throughout San Francisco, Marin, and Sonoma. They also do restaurant and light commercial build-outs as well. And last but not least, of course, is Dan McLennan. Say hi, Dan. There he is. He is a partner of Smith Curry Hancock. He's on the lawyering side of our conversation today, and he's in charge of Smith Curry's San Francisco office. Dan serves and has served in various capacities for numerous construction associations over the 35 years plus as self-described counsel to the construction industry. Dan is proud to tell folks that he, quote, eats, breathes, sleeps, and dreams in construction law, unquote, and, quote, is a construction lawyer geek, so you don't have to be, unquote, which is wonderful characteristics for you, Dan. I'm so glad that you take that role. He represents construction industry participants of all stripes, from owners to suppliers and everyone in between, navigating any construction issue at any stage in the company's and their project's existence. As an aside, Dan Riley notes that he has a special passion for making insurance companies live up to their promises to contractors. Yay for that. All right, so take it away. Rob, I believe you are our first contender.
Thanks for having me. Can y'all hear me okay? Can you see my screen?
You sound good.
All right, awesome. Let's see if I can actually get this thing started here. So actually, I'm just going to pop out of here real quick. Let me just do this again, because I have a feeling that it's going to get a little weird unless I do it one more time in a different way. There we go. Okay. So my job today is to try to tell you in relatively brief time what's been going on in the economy and where we foresee things happening in the economy. The way I normally start these talks is I look at what's going on at the national economy because we get those data earlier than the state or the local level. And this is about 2 weeks old. This is the evolution of jobs in the United States from the beginning of the Great Recession, November 2007, to the end of the Great Recession, in the sense that we got our jobs back to the same volume of workers And you can see that evolution over a certain number of months. And then I'm going to show you the COVID-19 evolution since January 2020. So this is what the Great Recession looked like. It took about 78 months, seasonally adjusted, to go from the beginning of job losses in the United States to the end of those job losses, or basically the same volume of workers. Now, this is the COVID-19 evolution. And you can see that those two recessions acted differently on the overall labor market, which then, of course, drives things like what happens with gross domestic product, demand for goods and services, and other things that we watch at the macro level of the economy. You can see the V shape of the COVID-19 recession and its slow progression back up toward that red dotted line, which we're 96.7% there as of the end of August. We need that black line to go above that red line before we start growing. But this, you can see how the two recessions now are starting a little bit similar in the sense that we maybe are on the other side of the recession and are in recovery mode, but the recovery now has some work to do to actually just get us back to where we started. So we're almost there. Most economists are predicting we will cross that red dotted line in 2022. We will see. As part of that, we have some forecasts looking forward for the national economy. These data show the latest forecast as of August 2021. The Federal Reserve in Philadelphia interviews 40 economists every quarter to try to get their opinion on where they think gross domestic product or the growth of income in the economy is going over the next few years, and also the unemployment rates to give a sense of where labor markets are going. This is the latest forecast. So a couple little nuances here. This is quarter to quarter over the next few quarters, including the quarter we're currently in. They downgraded the third quarter to a certain extent because the Delta variant had kicked up and slowed down original jobs growth. They kicked up the fourth quarter. They're expecting some of this to play out. And then they kicked up the first and second quarter of 2022 under the supposition we're basically trading slower growth in this quarter and to a certain extent the last quarter than was expected for the next few quarters. Unemployment rates continue to sort of see, or at least are forecasted to slowly continue to move down toward where we started the Great Recession. That might happen by the end of 2022 for the national economy. So in a quarterly sense, these data suggest two things. One, we're kind of slow and steady on the path, but we don't expect another recession, meaning that these economists did not expect that we're going to have social conditions in such a way we have to shut the economy down again. Over the next few years, this is what it looks like, kind of the same story, downgrading a little bit on an annualized basis from where we were last quarter. So the shaded column is the current forecast. The column next door to it on its left is the older forecast from 1 quarter ago. So you can see a little bit of downgrading over the next few years, but the unemployment rate, while it kicked up a little bit for the end of this year, is cruising down at a relatively good speed. And we'll be basically in that sort of similar 2017 to 2019 situation by the beginning of 2023. Now, another agency that looks at these things is the Congressional Budget Office, and their outlook as of July is very similar to this outlook. So economists generally are kind of coalescing around this year's the big growth year where a lot of the inflation is going to take place, whatever inflation is going to be there. Inflation is going to moderate, but it's going to moderate basically along with growth toward the end of 2024. One of the big items is labor force growth. Most economists see the amount of people actually going back in the labor force is much slower than we saw at the end of the Great Recession and in the beginning of the recovery in the 2010s. We'll see if that plays out, but to a certain extent, that slower labor force growth is feeding that moderating forecast. Okay, that's kind of the national picture in relatively quick fashion. Things look pretty good. They've moderated a little bit. The Delta variant has changed economic outcomes to a certain extent in the United States overall. Let's talk about California and Marin County and the trades. One of the things that's been really tricky is trying to forecast what's going to happen with all the volatility. So this is the original forecast of the Department of Finance in California that accompanied the governor's budget, initial budget in January. This is what it looked like after the May revise. So you can see that there was a deviation after 2021 from the original forecast and a real vertical climb of jobs. And what these data are quarterly jobs counts in California, and basically a way of gauging how many more workers there are in California. That's how much larger the California economy is going to become from generating income. Much quicker ascension, much quicker recovery in the May revise. This is the beginning of the COVID-19 recession. So you can see that instead of crossing that red dotted line in 2024, which was January 2021's forecast for California, now the forecast is to cross it sometime late in 2022. So that speeds things up about 2 years, which is great. We'll see how it plays out, but that is an immense amount of change in 4 months in terms of the information and making those kind of quick changes to forecasts. The forecasts have been extremely volatile. So the two lessons here, we're in recovery mode. Yes. Is it still a very volatile outlook? Yes. Okay. Similar graph to what we saw at the national level, looking at the Great Recession and then comparing it to the COVID-19 recession, but also putting California on here. So this is Marin County's evolution in the Great Recession. It took about 59 months to go from where we were in Marin County in total employment at the end of 2007 to get back to that level. So about basically 5 years later. This is what Marin County's recovery has looked like in terms of COVID-19. And this is what the state of California has looked like, tracked pretty well. And if you look at most counties in California, they're all kind of tracking, especially the sort of ones that have at least 250,000 people in it. The smaller counties don't have as much, they didn't have as much shutdown, thus they don't have as much downturn and ultimately volatility in terms of recovery. But a lot of counties, especially in the Bay Area, are basically tracking the state on average. So for Marin County, we're 95.9% back to where we were in January 2020. We need to cross that red line to truly have recovered. And these data are actually going to be updated on Friday. This is as of last month. If we look across industries in Marin County, this was the initial cut from January 2020 in April 2020, when the recession really started to grip our local economy. Big cuts across all industry sectors. You can see construction is second from the left. That's April. Now here's May. Real quick recovery in construction and in some other industries. But if you look at the far right, leisure and hospitality and other services, think hair salons, nail salons, nonprofits that don't have anything to do with healthcare, real big cuts, not a lot of quick recovery. Then by December, recovery was still there, but slow in those services industries as well. May this year, now we're jumping ahead a little bit. You can see construction actually now has growth versus where we were at the beginning of the recession, June and July. So construction has been one of the leading industries in Marin County in terms of moving us out of the initial aspects of the recession. We'll see if this momentum continues, but if you look at the far right, those other services industries still have a little way to go. This is the latest housing forecast from Zillow. And if you ask housing economists across California about the California housing market, they're all very similar, plus or minus 2%. A lot of it's kind of finger licking in the wind. We just don't know what the percentage is going to be, but we do know that most of the fundamental aspects of housing markets are still positive for demand to exceed supply. So they're expecting in Marin County between July 2021 and July 2022, about 10.5% price growth in Marin County, and that's on top of what's already happened the last 12 months. So really quick price ascension. I'll come back later as some of the positives and negatives of that, but this is just something to watch for and whether or not those housing prices play out. One of the key ideas I wanted to pull out in terms of the trades in the construction industry and what we've seen is the building materials prices. So I just thought this looked very historic and it was something to think about. And I'm sure Rob and Dan are going to talk about this to a certain extent also. You can see how this has evolved from 2005, where we sort of saw the end of the building move or the building boom between 1992 and 2007 slowly come to an end, and a flattening of those prices, a long flat period as construction was trying to figure itself out. Then startups, more supply comes in, downturn, flat period, sort of slow and steady movement, prices relatively stable. And then when COVID-19 happened, it just took off. To a certain extent, this can affect how we look forward. If those prices are looking like they're going to stick around, does that affect the cost of getting projects done? Will that keep homeowners from remodeling? Will we see more volatility in those markets? That's an extreme amount of volatility in terms of just the materials price. Then you stack on labor, you stack on policy, you stack on timing. But the good thing is rates look like they're going to stick around at relatively low levels. So demand and supply characteristics in construction remain relatively volatile. This is just one microcosm of that. Okay, so economists are seeing the following challenges and opportunities for construction. Where are the workers going to come from? Not so much in the next 12 months, but really over the next 12 years. We have to be thinking forward if we want to see this industry continue to sort of slowly and steadily grow. Will there be lingering issues in terms of the cost of doing business? At this point, it seems like that is more likely than not. Should we expect the taxes are on the rise? Washington, D.C. is right now, or Congress is currently debating how large a package is going to come out. The supposition is more wealthy people are going to finance that package, If that's true, Marin County is a relatively wealthy place. Will that slow down remodeling because the after-tax return on either my wealth or income might be affected? Hence, we're going to delay projects in that we would have done otherwise, but for that tax increase. Will there be continued resistance to building homes throughout California? A lot of talk about building homes. At the local level, if all politics are truly local, a lot of resistance still. We'll see how those two play off of each other. And ultimately, will there be a move toward alternative building products? So are we going to be in a situation where we're not building the same types of homes anymore between drought, fire resistance, and just simply wanted to be quote unquote more green? Will there be subsidies to make that happen? Will there be at least some incentives to make that happen? And will construction be seen as a partner in that? And that's mainly where some of the opportunities lie. Will we see climate change actually be a boon? Basically going in and remodeling homes, remodeling buildings to become a little bit more climate resistant. I'll take that back, I shouldn't say it that way. Be a little bit more climate friendly. And one of the things to watch out for, are disasters actually good for builders in the sense that it's something that is going to keep demand trucking along no matter what happens in the macroeconomy otherwise, because communities want to rebuild. It's kind of a nasty, dismal science nuance of disasters, but it's something to watch. And one big opportunity is actually getting a more diverse workforce. And that's something to watch for too, is that I think you're going to see workers and just the need to bring in workers that you hadn't seen before, but are going to want jobs in the trades. Okay, so for Marin Builders and just generally for Marin County and construction, fall and winter cases, it's a big deal. Those forecasts I told you before, we need to get through fall and winter clean. We'll see if we do that. How equity markets continue, we forget that income and wealth are different from each other. How many construction decisions specifically with homeowners are based on wealth versus their income? If stock market takes a 15 to 20% dip, is that going to affect construction demand? It's something to watch. If people are out there and they want to work, where are you going to find the workers? And furthermore, if they're working at home now, will that become the next trend of remodeling home offices in such a way that they're not going back to the office? We need to do something with the house to make it feel like an office, at least part of it. And then watch for climate change. The good thing about the infrastructure bill that should come is it might generate some construction demand, but will it shift resources from one part of the trades to the other, maybe building construction to heavy construction? We're all kind of waiting to see. Should be a big bill. How good it is for the trades in the end is still an open question. And folks, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rob. That was wonderful. Really some good things to think about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. You bet.
Awesome. Okay, so my perspective, I'm a general contractor, so I'm going to bring it down from Rob's, kind of federal, state, and local level down to the individual company level. So, from my perspective as a general contractor, the supply market pertains to a few areas on a day-to-day basis, right? There's materials, subcontractors and vendors, and labor. So I want to take each of those briefly one at a time, and then we'll talk about how we at Upcycle as a general contractor are dealing with them. So first with materials, no big surprises here, but just to kind of reiterate what everybody knows is going on. I spoke with Danny Della Santina, VP Operations at Golden State yesterday, and we were reviewing how, of course, we've seen these massive increases in lumber costs, but over the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've seen a pretty precipitous drop in the prices of lumber. Now, not in terms of Rob's 20-year chart, but in terms of the last few months. There are still a few items that we're still seeing high prices in, some kind of seemingly random things like some LVLs, some engineered products, but generally speaking, the lumber we use for framing, plywood and 2x and 4x and some other dimension lumber, prices seem to be dropping, which is great. Steel remains expensive, which affects not only things like structural steel and ornamental steel, I-beams and railings and that sort of thing, but it also affects the smaller products, the hardware products, Simpson hardware, for example, or fasteners. So what we've been hearing, at least, and Rob would know better, but the costs of the metal products seems like they'll stay high for at least the next few months, or at least they definitely will not track with lumber necessarily. Then kind of moving along in the sequence of the project, doors and windows. So I'm sure most people know this, but doors and windows, the main issue remains lead times. Most of the major manufacturers are still doing the regular price increases as they usually do, but we haven't seen the excessive increase in costs as you have with things like lumber and steel. The one exception I know of is Fleetwood. Apparently Fleetwood skipped a price increase because they had an excess of raw material in their factory and they wanted to get it out and into products, so they increased demand by suspending a price increase. But that's the only one I've heard of personally. We deal with, Marvin, Milgard, all the typical providers quite a bit. So again, lead times. So we've been hearing from a lot of the majors that lead times for even relatively straightforward window and door packages are as high as 6 months these days. Seeing it less with interior doors. Personally, I'm seeing it mostly with exterior doors and windows. Yes. So then lastly, fixtures and appliances. Again, it's the lead times. We're not seeing crazy costs on things like plumbing fixtures, electrical fixtures, appliances, but we are seeing lead times. I'll get to how we are dealing with that. And then lastly, subcontractors. Real simple for us because we're a general contractor. So if you're a specialty contractor, it could mean your vendor or your sub. And if you're a general like me, it would mean both. It would mean both subcontractors and vendors. Bottom line is everybody's busy. So we'll get to how I've been dealing with that. And then lastly, labor. Labor market is very tight, as we know. Not only in the availability of the labor, but the skill level of the labor that's out there. That's a big thing. We have to be careful how we deal with that. It's quite challenging. Here at Upcycle, we deal regularly with hiring for both trade and management level positions. So I'll touch on both of those things. Okay, so what does all of this mean for us? It means uncertainty, right? That's kind of what this meeting is about. Is how are we going to deal with this uncertainty? How are we dealing with this uncertainty? So I will say that it may sound a little Pollyanna, but I think it's true. The number one thing that we can do whenever there's uncertainty in the market is make sure that we have invested time in building goodwill. So that means both with our customers, and it also means with our subcontractors and our vendors, anybody that's in our orbit in business. I'm sure Dan will speak to this, but in my experience, most legal situations that go legal can be avoided if there were more face-to-face conversations than just emails and third-party letters sent. That's just my opinion and my experience. So my approach basically has been based on building goodwill. Let's see. So, so if you have built this goodwill and people trust you, you can, in a time like this, you can pull some of that goodwill and utilize the trust to solve most of the issues. But in order to do this as a contractor, at least, you need to be transparent, you need to have good paperwork, and you need to have a robust process that people will trust. So specifically, what are we doing? So number one, we no longer offer stipulated sum or fixed pricing for our clients. The market's unstable, and we can't be responsible for assuming this market risk. We're administrators of a commission project. We're not a speculative broker of services and materials, right? So we still conduct a rigorous bidding process. So the budgets we provide are well thought out and tight and all of that, but it's just not a fixed price. So this has been a big change for us. One of our selling points used to be that we would put in all this time in up front and offer fixed price contracts, but we just can't do it anymore. What I will say for any contractors out there thinking about making a similar change, there's many different forms of cost plus, time and material, all sorts of different ways to structure the contract. So you'll need to find the one that's right for you and for your specific company and situation. And the AIA website is a great place to start. They have tons of templates for different types of projects. I found that this change, most clients have been, a little hesitant but amenable to this type of change in contract structure because they understand what's going on, and especially, there's been some educational process that's been required to just talk to people about why and get that trust. But you have to do it early so that you don't go through your bidding process, your sales process, that maybe weeks or months, and then drop this on the potential client towards the end of the process. It's uncomfortable. It's just like talking about money, right? You have to get to a point where you're comfortable talking about it. Same thing with this contract structure. Set expectations early. So good accounting, good budget composition and formatting, and good paper trail are key for your client buy-in for this process. You need to have your accounting function dialed in. I have a wonderful CFO, and I've always believed in investing in this function. As a small business owner, you can't skip the investment of someone keeping good track of your books. Okay. The second thing we're doing, in addition to not providing fixed price contracts, is we've had to issue change orders on projects underway, even when scope of work has not changed, to recoup some of these increased material costs. So this can apply regardless of your contract structure, right? And so when subcontractors come to me with a request for this subcontract adjustment based on material increase, what we said is, okay, please provide us your change order, provide us some backup. You know, if you're buying from Golden State, you're buying from Pace Supply, whomever, provide us, you know, your bids to show us the backup, and at minimum. And then also we usually ask that some sort of economic data, a chart, an article, something also be provided that we can then pass on to the client. Then what we do is we do not mark up this material cost change to the client. So we say, hey, you know, this lumber package went up $5,000. Here's the bill that was given to us. We're just going to pass that on to you. And that's our way of sort of being team oriented. We're not going to assume any of those costs, but we will certainly not try to benefit from this uncertain market. And I have to say that this has worked 100% of the time. We have not had one situation where the client hasn't eventually signed the change order. In some cases, people will sign same day. Sometimes they need a week or two to think about it, and I'm sure go do their own research, but we've had very good luck with that. Okay, let's see. So that's sort of the client side, a couple of things we're doing to deal with this uncertain market. On sort of the internal as a contractor side, for what do we do when we see our material costs increasing, and also dealing with labor shortage, is we have been seeking out subcontractors to do work that we would typically perform. In some cases, we've been able to reach out to subcontractors and attain pricing for us, it would be maybe framing or siding or interior finished carpentry. And because they're specialists in that trade, they're able to do it more effectively and cost effectively than I am with my labor force. So we had a situation where this happened on a project we're on now, where the framing package was going to increase, I think, $30K when we actually went to place the order, and we were going to self-perform the work. But we were able to go out to subcontractors, get a better price, and then redirect our carpenters to another project. And that's really a win-win, right? We put in the work for the client, and they got a better price. And we then, because we have a quote from a subcontractor, are not exposed to that market risk anymore. Let's see. Another thing that's going to come up, or has come up for us at least, has been this notion of how recent is your data, right? So when I submit a quote to a client, they often want to know these days, well, when did you price this lumber package, right? And so obviously we have, as contractors, we have to go out and do the work. We can't always be just watching the markets and updating our pricing. So there's always going to be some lag. Well, again, that contract structure is a good way to combat that, because I may price something 6 months before something is ordered. Well, by having the contract structure that we do, it allows us as contractors to go and do the work and for the client to get the correct price. So when it comes to the shortage of subcontractors out there, a short supply of subcontractors, the short and sweet of it is treat your subcontractors well and expand the Rolodex, right? That's what you do in these times. You know, we try our best as general contractor to ensure that we give our subs thorough information when we first go out for an RFP, send it early so they have time to process it, ask questions, turn quotes around, you know, revise as needed, and get the work scheduled. We're also starting to cast the net a little wider and establish new relationships, again, as you need to in these times. And in that process, it's important to dig a little and make sure you're bringing on good parties, that you're vetting them, and really trying to dig in and make it work instead of throwing up our hands and saying, well, my usual go-tos aren't available, so I don't know what to do. In these times, we have to dig a little and be a little bit creative. And the best way to keep, I have found, is to pay people on time, treat them well, and be ready for them. So when they come on site, they get in, they get out, you reduce their number of mobilizations, everybody makes money, and it's truly a win-win. Okay, and lastly, on the labor side. So again, we hire people both on the management and the field labor side, so I'll address each separately. So on the field labor side, as we know, there's a shortage of people, there's a shortage of skill. So again, reducing the amount of self-performed work and more subcontracting. Staffing up with quality employees, onboarding them and training them quickly is nearly impossible these days. It's hard enough at any time, and it requires a significant investment. So we're seeking out experts. You know, this will require strict internal controls, because anytime you are allowing another party to perform part of your work, you have to have really tight oversight and process to ensure that your name and your quality, your reputation is maintained. Another thing we're doing is increasing referral bonuses for existing employees, right? When they bring in someone new to the company, We have a good referral bonus program. But what's important is that this bonus is paid over time. So it has to be earned. The new person has to stick around for a certain amount of time for that bonus to be fully earned. And then on the management side, this is a really cool thing. We found a company that is sort of like a recruiter light. So it's called Contractor Staffing Source. I recommend anybody to go look into them. And what they do is, for a monthly fee, they will take your copy for your job posting and, of course, push it out to the top 20 job boards or whatnot. And then as applicants come in, they do a screening call with them, and pending that the answers to the screening questions are what you've agreed upon you want them to be within range, they will send a link for essentially a personality assessment test to this person. And it's about an hour and a half test, and it's based on the DISC personality profile assessment system. And you get the results, and the Contractor Staffing Source on a once per week call will review any results that have come in, and that can help make hiring decisions. So we've been able to hire in the last 3 months 5 high-level project managers for our company, just utilizing this source. And if you sent me those people's resumes, or if I just had a face-to-face with them, I don't know if we would be working together today. But because they dug in a little bit deeper, the results we received were great. So that's a way we've kind of worked around the current market, or worked with the current market. And then lastly, of course, we've had to improve our compensation packages, right? We've increased wages. We're offering perks. All of our site supers now get an F-150 when they come aboard. We have pretty good PTO policies and that sort of thing. So that's how we've dealt with the labor shortage. So that's the contractor's perspective on the current supply market. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. That's awesome. Appreciate that. And now we have Dan. You ready, Dan?
Ready.
Excellent. Oh, one thing, if I can just interject, if anybody has any questions as we're going along, feel free to put them in the chat window on the side of the Zoom, the main Zoom screen, and that way we can capture that for when Dan's done here, and have a Q&A session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brad. And good job, Rob, or for Mr. Upscale. I'm sorry. Yeah, Rob. That was great. And I have some follow-up comments on what Rob said. And number one that I want to reiterate that he said is brilliant is the rapport with the client for the remodeling industry is essential. There's a lot of forgiveness and grace that can be gotten from a homeowner that you won't get in the contract necessarily. And so we're going to talk about the contractual and legal issues as we go along here. And so for today, what we're going to talk about is we've all seen and experienced the big price increases for materials, which we talked about already. Can we pass these on upstream? And Rob's approach is brilliant, and that's the way to do it. I'm going to tell you about how to do it legally, but the conversation that Rob has can be outside of the contract, and that's the most seamless way to do it. When I did a major remodel in my house, the contractor blew the schedule unmercifully. I had liquidated damages in the contract, but I didn't have the heart to assess them because he was a good guy. He did good work and he cared, and stuff happened. And so I just let it go. And that's what you want to strive for with your customers. We're also seeing delays in the supply chain. And can we avoid claims against us for those delays? And, again, the homeowner could, in theory, under a fixed price contract with a set schedule, hold you for damages and assess it against them. If you have good working relationship and you keep them informed of what's going on in the supply chain, they're going to understand and just say, well, stuff happens and we'll get our house when we get our house. But some people aren't like that. And by the way, it's getting worse. We all have experiences with people that we think are good up front. And then as it turns out, they turn to be very adversarial and me first instead of partnership first. And so we have to watch out for that. So I want to encourage you to have your contracts in shape just in case you get one of those bad apples. And unfortunately, in my business, I'm seeing more of those lately than the kinder, gentler ones that Rob's been grooming and working with. Lastly, how can we protect ourselves going forward against price increases and material shortages? And I think the same answers go, but it just depends on where we are in the process and what's the timing. So let's go on with that. Can we pass materials cost increases upstream? Now, Rob's idea is a good one, is that we don't do fixed price contracts anymore. I'm going to tell you that there's a better way to do it. California home improvement, and this is specifically for the remodeling industry. California home improvement contract laws are very particular about how the contracts are written. We have a course that MBA puts on every year to do home improvement contracts. We have anybody who participates gets a California very picky laws compliant contract that's fairly contractor favorable. One of the key things that California will penalize a contractor for is not having a fixed price contract. The statute says that you have to express your contract in dollars and cents, what the entire project will cost. Okay, so you have to have a fixed price contract. I have a homeowner down in Los Gatos that had a contractor that used a time and materials type contract with no guaranteed maximum price. And we got into conflict with the contractor and were able to deprive the contractor of recovery of his profit and overhead because he did not have a compliant contract. It doesn't mean the contractor is not entitled to be paid for his work, but he's just not entitled to get his extra profit. We did give him some overhead. So just a word to the wise. Now, how do we deal with the problem of cost increases? And Rob said it also is that it's in the change order process. Okay, so how do you set up the change order process? First off is there's no statute that's going to help you with this. It says contractor who's injured by increase in prices is going to be able to pass that on to the owner. No such statute, unfortunately. You may have, if you have one of my contracts that you get through the MBA's home improvement contract program, you'll get this clause. And it says that the contractor and subcontractors determine their contract costs based on labor and materials in existence at the time of the bid. Note what Rob said. Keeping your good accounting, being able to prove what your bids were based on is critical. Whether or not you have this clause in your contract, the owners are going to want it. Well, okay, prove it. What's the increase? What were you planning on? And what is it now? So if materials and labor costs increase during the course of the work by more than 5%, I highlight this because it's a variable. You know, some contractors have a lower threshold of pain. I've seen guys put in or contractors put in 2 or 3% there. 5% seems fair to me, but that's just my preference. But it's over the cost of labor and material available to contractor at the time of the work. Okay, so they will be passed along to owner with corresponding profit and overhead. All right, now this is the standard clause that I have in my contracts. Now I appreciate Rob's ideas. Look, you know, we're not going to tag you profit overhead on the overage. We'll give you the original profit and overhead load on this scope of work, but we're going to pass on the extra cost of the purchase of those. I think if I was going to revise this clause, I would probably delete that. Or if you're in a negotiation with the owner at the time of signing the original contract and they say, well, gosh, that doesn't seem fair, then I would suggest that the contractor who's negotiating with the homeowner would be wise to say, you know what, that's fine. We won't sting you with our profit and overhead, but we do need to pass those costs on to you. Okay, can we avoid liability for materials supply chain delays? Unlike the cost pass-through, there is potential for a statutory protection. This is what I call the statutory force majeure clause. And what it says is, and this is Civil Code section 1511, By the way, if anybody wants a copy of these slides, they are available. Rick has them, Christine has them. They'll be available on the website. And if you want to take a look very closely at some of this language, you'll want to pick up a copy of the slides. We're going to go pretty quickly through them. So 1511 says, want a performance of an obligation. That's your job to complete the work on time and on budget, or in whole or in part, or any delay in performing the contract on time and on budget is excused if, we're going to focus on item 2 here, when it's prevented or delayed by an irresistible superhuman cause or act of public entities, unless the parties have expressly agreed to the contrary. Okay, so expressly agreed to the contrary would be a clause that says, if there's a pandemic in the future, we don't care, you still have to come in on time and on budget. I haven't seen that clause in the contract yet, and I don't think it's going to be coming. So what's delayed by irresistible superhuman cause? Well, what's a superhuman cause? Is that an alien that comes down and smashes your project? No, I don't think so. Superhuman is other than normal human behavior. It's irresistible. Sounds like a COVID to me. Certainly it sounds like the Delta variant to me. So if you have a supply chain delay that's caused by a factory, for example, being shut down or diminished in their capacity because their workforce is out because of COVID infections, then you have an argument. Now, we have some challenges there, obviously, what's the proof? But, you know, if you have a letter from the manufacturer saying, due to COVID impacts and our injury to our workforce, we are behind by 4 weeks on production of those windows, you can show that to the owner and mention, you know, if there's any conflict with the owner, if they're really trying to push you on responsibility for delay, then you could mention to them section 1511 and the actual impact by the COVID variants and COVID-19 on your job. All right, so the other thing, in addition to statutory protection, again, you want to look at your force majeure provisions. And these are special language in your contract. Hopefully you have them. The AIA contract, which Rob mentions, has a force majeure clause. We're going to look at that briefly in a minute. I'm going to tell you, though, that the AIA contracts as drafted are not legal in California for home improvement contracts. There's ways that we can use them by attaching the AIA form contract to the home improvement contract laws compliant form. And we've done this many times because people are comfortable with the terms and conditions of the AIA contracts, but those need to have the legislature's prescribed language put on top of it so that you're compliant and you have your terms and conditions from the AIA. All right, so your force majeure clause means superior force. What is that? Well, you're excused from your performance obligations when certain events or circumstances beyond the party's control is the essence of it, delay performance or make performance commercially impracticable, illegal, inadvisable, or impossible. So not just inconvenient, but significantly impaired. Examples, typically these are written right into the clause: wars, riots, earthquakes, hurricanes, lightnings, etc. You don't see a pandemic there. Every construction lawyer I know now has pandemic and epidemic specifically listed in the force majeure clause. So you want to look at, see if that's in there. If you're in a conflict with your owner, you can point to the force majeure clause and say, look, you know, this is force majeure. Because of the impacts of force majeure, I'm going to need to extend the contract schedule and or include price. Does it cover epidemic and pandemic? Is a straight question. Now, typically what these clauses do, they give you more time. They'll extend your schedule for completion of the work, but not additional compensation. And the event must be the proximate cause of the non-performance. That means, can you prove a causal link? Did it really make a difference? And was there a cause of the delay caused by the owner? If that's the case, then you have a whole different group of rights to get additional time and additional money. So just keep an eye out for that. Force majeure clause issues must be beyond the reasonable control. Obviously, in pandemic time it is. Is it foreseeable? Well, now it is, because we're in it. But before the pandemic happened, it wasn't foreseeable. And so these force majeure clauses were readily applicable. Now you specifically need to add the word pandemic and epidemic. All right, and then do you make reasonable efforts to avoid the impact? So yes, there are contractual ways to pass on to the owner additions for time and sometimes additions for money. I will just say the consensus docs form just gives an extension of contract time. And similarly, the AIA force majeure clause gives only an extension of time. My office has been asked to remedy or to craft force majeure provisions for subcontracts. We can go obviously both ways. We can make it subcontractor favorable or contractor favorable. In this case, the subcontractor is solely going to get an extension of time from the contractor, but only for excusable and non-concurrent delay. Those are technical terms we don't have time to explore at this point, but just know that there's a lot of different ways to write these. For a contractor, we will write them to say that not only does the contractor get additional time for the schedule, but also pay for the impacts related to that additional time and other acts required to handle the pandemic issues. Okay, so there's a broad range of delay clause issues. They're going to be in your slides for you. Just if you're interested in these issues, go ahead and pull a copy of the slides and look at the delay issues. And then lastly, how do we protect ourselves going forward against price increases and materials shortages? We've talked a lot about that already just because of the nature of the contracts. And I just have a few recommendations. In summary, include those provisions specifically addressing delays and cost impacts. Right now, you have to add the words epidemic and pandemics. And also you should address specifically that disruptions to material and equipment supply may happen. Then recognize that illness of your workforce and subcontractors' workforces may happen due to these, and that you need to accommodate who's going to be responsible for the costs and impacts of that. Government quarantines, I think we're through the woods on that, but maybe not. It depends on how bad Delta gets, or if there's another outbreak of some other variant that the vaccines aren't helping with, God forbid, but this stuff could happen. So we anticipate it now, we have to put that in there. And then what other regulatory and safety obligations are going to be coming down from the CDC and the state government? Are we going to have to put a freeze on job sites? We have done that in the past, so we have to anticipate that. Okay, so we have a sample clause that says basically both. And this specifically for COVID-19, this is a protection clause, and it gives you extension to the contract schedule and an equitable adjustment to the contract price